All right, so now that you guys know all about the product rating process, I'm going to get into a little bit more detail about the actual testing requirements. So in general, the CRRC, you can think about products in two different categories, standard and other. So there is a CRRC rating option that's called standard product if you were to go to the online portal. So don't get that confused with this here. This is just a way to put the products that are being rated into two easy to define bins. So standard products we think of as smooth, flat, and homogeneous in color. So examples of this include single ply, metal, and field applied coating products. Other products are going to be variegated, meaning multicolored, rough surfaced, or profiled. So that includes products like tile, wood, polymer composite products that are molded into a specific shape, and membranes that have a printed pattern, things like that. Before we talk about the specific requirements for each of those, I just, in that last slide, used the word variegated. So I wanted to clarify the meaning of that word because I know I was not familiar with that before I started working at the CRRC. And what we define variegated as just is multicolor. And we do have a specific test that is used to confirm if a product is variegated or not. And we call that the 5-point reflectance test. Pretty self-explanatory. We take 5 measurements. They are equally spaced across the product sample diagonally here, as you can see in this illustration. It is always required for certain product types. So again, rough surface products such as asphalt shingle, for example, we would need to do the 5-point reflectance test because the solar reflectance test that you do is that or not the product is considered variegated. And the test for that is if any of these 5 measurements vary by more than plus or minus 0.05 from the straight average of all 5 measurements, then the product is considered variegated. So if you have one solar reflectance reading that is much lower and then one that is much higher than the average, then that's an indication that this product is variegated and you need to use a different test method that requires more test spots to ensure that the average that you get is accurate. So we have specific size requirements depending on the product type. It does vary by product category. Again, thinking in those 2 bins, standard versus other, and also the specific product type, so shingles, tiles, single ply, etc. The length and width of each specimen, which is each individual test piece, needs to be within 1 inch of the minimum required dimensions. So I'm going to go through a table that has the minimum dimensions on the next slide. But just keep in mind that one of your responsibilities as an AITL is to actually measure those specimens and make sure that they meet the size requirements to an accuracy of 1/4 inch, 0.25 inches per measurement. So if the specimens don't meet the size requirements, then it is actually the responsibility of the AITL to work with the licensee to get new test specimens that do meet the size requirements. And we do require that laboratories provide photos of specimens. So, we are also checking that as the CRRC, but it's going to save a lot of time and effort if you as the AITL can catch that before it gets to us. So this table provides a summary of the product type, size requirement, and number of specimens. Obviously, this is not that helpful for you to try to memorize, but as I mentioned, we are going to share these slides. So hopefully this will be a good reference tool. All of this is contained in the CRRC 1 program manual or the ANSI CRRC S100. So also keep that in mind. But just to go through these really quickly, for standard products like the single ply and the coatings and things like that, we're looking at a 4-inch by 6-inch specimen. For variegated products that are not shingles, so for example, let's say you have a single ply product that has some sort of printed pattern on it that's very variegated, then the specimen size for that would need to be 4 inches by 10 inches. And for tile, they can either be 6-inch by 6-inch pieces or actually full-size tiles. And in terms of the number of products we need for that, for all of those product types, you need 9 specimens. And those specimens need to come from 2 different batches. So 3 need to come from batch A, 3 from batch B, and then the other 3 will be a mix of those 2. So, let's say overall you have 4 specimens from batch A and 5 from batch B, or vice versa, to get this mix here. And that's just to make sure that, again, there's uniformity in the production there, that it's not all just from one special one-off batch, again, trying to prevent any tampering and maintaining the credibility of the values that we display. For variegated shingles, the requirements are a little bit different. It's going to be a total exposed surface of 10 inches by 36 inches. So what that looks like is basically, as is stated here, two courses, one on top of the other, and a width of 36 inches and a height of 10 inches. And for the specimens of that, we only need 3, one from batch A, one from batch B, and one from a mix. And that's so 3 of those big specimens. So in that case, one of those goes to each test farm site, Arizona, Florida, Ohio. For these standard products and tile and non-shingles that are variegated, then you would be sending 3 to each test farm site in Arizona, Florida, Ohio. Lastly, for wood products, the specimen size is considered a non-shingle, so it would be a variegated non-shingle in terms of the size requirement. Needs to be at least 4 inches by 10 inches. And it has a special requirement that for the 9 specimens, 3 need to be the lightest kind of color, 3 need to be medium, and 3 need to be dark. So, wood does have that natural variation. And so to account for that, we require that the licensee provide this kind of the full range of the potential colors. Okay, so now getting into the fun stuff, the actual testing devices. We have primary test method for solar reflectance uses this reflectometer, devices and services, SSR. So basically the main method there is C1549, ASTM C1549, and then we have some variants. So for variegated products, as I alluded to previously, we do have a method called test method number 1, where you actually take many more measurements than are required by C1549 to converge on an average that is more accurate. And for thermal emittance, we have the emisometer, which is shown in the right picture. And with the emisometer, you can use ASTM C1371 or the slide method. So this diagram here is showing basically the slide method, where you're taking the 4 measurements and convening on an average there. And we'll go into a little bit more detail about that. But this is basically what the 2 major devices look like that are the mostly used for the CRRC rating program. So to go into a little bit more detail, again, this is a helpful kind of reference. Don't expect anyone to memorize this right now. We have ASTM C1549, which is acceptable for most products, although there are some exceptions which are shown below. We have test method number 1, which uses, again, the portable reflectometer. It's specifically for tile products, wood products, or variegated products. We also have the tile template method, which is Basically, we provide a template that has 6 measurement points. You apply that to each of 9 tiles for a total of 54 measurements, but instead of them being at random locations, which is how the test method number 1 tool works, it's just at these 6 specific places. Again, I know that I am kind of giving a high-level overview here, and you probably have a lot of questions about the details, the mechanics of this, but that is going to be discussed at the in-person training. So again, just trying to get everyone familiar with the terminology here and kind of what to expect. ASTM E903 uses a spectrometer. It is usable for most products. An exception would be, for example, roofing aggregate, because if it's loose, it won't work in the device. It uses a smaller sample size, has some limitations. In that way, most laboratories actually don't have the equipment to use this test method because it is very expensive. But we do allow that, if you're a lab that has this device, you can report results using this method. There's also ASTM E1918, which uses a pyranometer, and it can be used for any product, which is nice, but it requires a large sample size. So the minimum sample size for testing with E1918 is 4 meters by 4 meters. So that's a very large sample size. It also requires that there be direct sunlight with no haze and no clouds. So there are some specific test conditions. It is a good method to use in the field, whereas these other methods are more laboratory methods. And lastly, we offer we allow testing using ASTM-C 1864, which also uses the portable reflectometer for directionally reflective materials. So these are materials where from one angle it looks black and from another it looks white. There's a specific test method for those type of products. So for thermal emittance, again, we have 2 test methods. The first is ASTM-C 1370. This is basically just for up. And you'll just take 3 measurements per specimen. That is shown in the left-hand picture. The product is placed on a heat sink, and you just take 1 measurement, lift the measurement head, and move it to the next spot. Pretty straightforward. The slide method is for everything else, so anything with a low thermal conductance, basically. So the measurement head is moved every 15 seconds without lifting it. So you're actually sliding it across the specimen, and it's a 4-spot trial, and then you're going to do 2 of those per specimen. So the next test I want to talk about is thickness. This is something that is required for 2 product types, field applied coatings and single ply products. Just have one example of a gauge here. We don't specify the device that you have to use to conduct thickness, but it is a requirement, and we'll talk a little bit about the reporting of that a little bit later, but just keep that in mind. And the way that that's done is that the average thickness taken from 5 evenly spaced points on each specimen has to be within 20% of the manufacturer's recommended dry film thickness measured in mils. So for example, if the manufacturer has a recommended dry film thickness of 20 mils, the AITL would get their calipers or thickness gauge out, and they would take 5 evenly spaced measurements on the specimen to make sure that it was somewhere within that 20% range for the product. If the specimens are not within that thickness tolerance, then the AITL again has to work with the licensee to get new specimens. And the reason for that is because we want to make sure that the product is really representing what the consumer would receive and what would be applied on the actual roof. So, if a contractor is applying a field applied coating, they're going to do it per the manufacturer's specifications. So we want to make sure that, we are testing to that as well. So the last test that I want to just briefly go over is colorimetry. We have this thing in the CRRC rating program called the color family program, and essentially it's for coated metal products. It allows similarly colored products to be rated as a product group instead of individual product ratings. Because there's such a variety of colors available, this makes it a little bit easier to group those products together. So each individual element of a given color family group will undergo color testing using ASTM E805 section 9. So there's some specific requirements there about the observer angle and things like that. That information is contained in Appendix 6 of the CRRC1 program manual. Again, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that here. I know that a lot of our AITLs don't actually offer color testing because they're not able to conduct testing to the E805 requirements. So if you have any questions about colorimetry and things like that, I'm happy to answer them offline, but I don't think that it's super important to go into a lot of detail about that today.